I think it's been 15 years probably when we first met, and I think it was at that first Northeast Sports Seminar that Art Horn put on, maybe. But it was colleagues, right? Like we met as colleagues and quickly became friends and continue to throw ideas out at each other, not just on hockey, but all sport, right? And that kind of, the first big event was development camp, right? Coming out to San Jose.
Yeah, I think it was either 2008 or 2009. You presented at, I'm trying to remember the exact name of it because it switched a few times, but I think that year it was the Northeast or the Boston Basketball and Hockey Symposium.
Yeah.
And I still remember you gave a great presentation on how you tier the training program design based on the age of the players that you were working with at the University of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So what does training look like for freshmen, sophomores, first upperclassmen? And, you and I connected, I think, on a phone call shortly after that. And, I still remember, at that point, I think that was when we spoke, you were just transitioning from Wisconsin into San Jose. Mm-hmm. And I still remember that phone call because, as a recent graduate from grad school and just kind of entering the field, I think you asked me questions for an hour, and I don't even know if I got to all the things that I was hoping to pepper you with. So, but yeah, I think actually that was 2008, so 16 years ago. Yeah, a lot of gray hairs.
Yeah, the gray hairs are showing the date there.
But yeah, and then it was a couple years after that you invited me out to help out with development camp at San Jose, and then I think I came out the next year to help with training camp too. Yeah. But great experience. Obviously, we went through a pretty comprehensive battery of testing, so it's good exposure.
There's so many particulars through the NHL season, like what you capture and how you capture it and the group that's there and all the stuff that you have to put into a small bag, let's say, and it's always fun, a fun time of year because you get to test everything that you want, but what's also valuable, right? What's also prevalent to a hockey player in designing your program, It's funny because I remember Jim and I talking about building Metabolic Elite, and he's like, we should put a board of advisors together, and he's like, he tasked me with it, and I was like, done. Kevin, Jimmy, Cal, Ben, and that's my guy. That's our group. That's our group who we came up through and with and learned with and picked each other's brains, until they were empty and borrowed ideas from and everything. Now we're here, right? And now I think we have a strong board. I think we have a strong board who can educate, but also educate on what our products do, but also how the products are linked to the training cycles that we're also, knee deep in every day.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get a lot of questions from people about, if I want to work in the NHL, what steps do I need to take as a young coach to prepare myself or to put myself in a position to be considered for those roles? And, now with this experience with Metabolic Elite, I was kind of reflecting back. Obviously, you gave me my first opportunity in the NHL, helping out at development camp, and then, whatever it was, 10 years later, coming out to work in San Jose with you. And you and I met at a seminar. We met at a continuing education event. And, I look around at the board. I met Jim Snyder the year before at a continuing education event. I met Cal, a couple years later at a Con Ed event. And Jim, my first exposure to his information is when you brought him out to San Jose to speak to
the mapping course.
The group that we had there. So, it's
Ben was on your dissertation committee.
And Cal, we're both on my dissertation committee. Yeah. So, but really, to me, that's an example of the impact that showing up to a live course can have. And, you never know the connections and the opportunities you'll have to meet people that will, obviously early on for me, it was a lot about learning and trying to take advantage of a lot of the information that you guys and the experiences that you guys were sharing. But, you fast forward a few years and become colleagues and friends. And, I'm excited to work together on Metabolic Elite too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Like people I think automatically think in pro sport that they have every single piece of every profession that works for the team. And, it's limitless. And when you really kind of pull the curtain back, you're like, wait a minute, you only have, at the time, right? Like the evolution of my time in the NHL, and this is my 19th year in pro sport. This will be 17 in the NHL. But I didn't have an assistant when I first started. You were my first assistant, and I had interns at the time, but the evolution needed to be like there needs to be a full-time strength and conditioning assistant, a performance assistant. We had a nutritionist who wasn't full-time, and now we have a full-time consultant with a student R&D, or who's on track to get their RD within our team now. So it's grown so much. The minor leagues never even had a strength coach. It was the strength coach for the NHL writing the program for the head athletic trainer, and they implemented it. And you just flew out to see the team and check in once every 2 months, So I think everybody who's outside looking in has to understand, like, people are wearing a lot of different hats in this profession, not just hockey, but other professions too. It's gotten better, but at the same time, nutrition was a big piece of what we do or had to communicate to our players. And I think that's unique about this group, this board, is like everybody has a vested interest in the nutritional piece as it relates to training and how it should evolve with your phases or your training blocks and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen the evolution of our profession in general from, kind of traditional strength and conditioning into now this more performance-oriented umbrella where, even thinking back to some of the development camp testing that we went through way back in the day, it's like, let's look at all the different physical qualities that can impact a player's performance, and let's make sure that we have some sort of feedback loop and audit to say, is this an area where if the player can make improvements, that it's likely going to benefit their game? And that was very comprehensive from a training standpoint. But then, to your point, you zoom out a little bit and it's like, okay, what else is there? We know nutrition is going to play a massive role. We know sleep and recovery is going to play a massive role. We know mental preparation and the mental skills and the resiliency and some of those inevitably challenging moments throughout the season are going to play a massive role. So, what started out as some teams maybe having somebody supervising strength and conditioning is now really exploded into these performance departments that, not only have experts in all of those different domains that are working together and collaborating, but you have somebody that's overseeing that and trying to, pull all the right strings at the right times to make sure that each individual player has the inputs that they need in the right moments to be successful. And ultimately, you get enough players that are pulling in the right direction, it's going to benefit the team. But nutrition is certainly a huge piece of that. And, the group that we have on this board, I think, like you mentioned, is exciting because everybody has such a wide breadth of experiences. I think everybody probably got in mostly from a strength and conditioning background, but nutrition's a massive piece of the puzzle for everybody that is here too. And we probably all found it for the same reason. You realize that if you're not fueling your body the same way, you're not going to be able to express the speed and the power and the strength and the conditioning that you've developed through training in the actual sport. You're not going to be able to maximize the adaptations you get from training. You're not going to be able to recover as well as you could to show up and be consistent on a day-to-day basis. And, nutrition is really it's one of the main drivers of all of those things, which are, impactful for short-term performance and long-term progress.
Yeah. It's one of I always say when talking to any athlete, young or old, ones who have really good nutritional habits or ones who have poor ones and they have to evolve it and improve them, is that nutrition stays with you every single second. Like, you're going to come to the gym, you're going to train, or you're going to come and skate, or you're going to come and hoop, or you're going to do whatever. And then that's going to stop and you're going to go home. But the nutritional piece is with you at home. And that's going to affect how you get your results and adaptations, right? So you really got to lock in, and whether it's the meals that you cook leading up to your game or after practice, or how you eat on the road, and how you use supplementation, whether it's easy to use it at the facility because it's front facing, it's right there. Someone's actually handing you, your recovery or daily pill packet. But when you go home, like, it's their responsibility as the athlete. It's an interesting piece. It's always, like you say, recovery is always with you, and nutrition is. I think young athletes now today have a little bit better grasp on it. I think the supplementation world is more front facing for them, and they see it more and they see its impact, or they're definitely influenced by it through social media and kind of what's out there and what high-end elite athlete is using products now. Is it a $50 billion industry, I think, year to year now, or maybe even more? So it's constantly going to be in front of our faces. But I think younger athletes are exposed to more, we still have the same problems. It's still the same song where you may get a kid who's now on their own as a pro and doesn't know how to cook. He doesn't know how to shop. He doesn't know where to go to shop. And so we're still going through that piece of education with them, but it's a vital piece, right? Because that's them becoming an adult, in a crazy pro athlete world.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is just how much youth sports have changed over the last 15 to 20 years too, and it'll be interesting to see how the changes in the NIL deals trickle down and affect sports where, before there was amateur youth sports and then maybe you're getting a scholarship to a program and then there's professional, and there were fairly clear-cut lines between all those different levels. But now you have high school kids that can have paid sponsorship deals. It changes everything. It allows now for the professionalization of youth sports, which I think is going to have some negative unintended consequences. But the reality is that preceding that, the youth sports schedule has changed considerably, where, I still remember working with a U16 hockey team that played over 90 games in their season.
Yeah.
So you have these youth athletes that are being exposed to professional sport competition schedules, practices, training. Obviously the off season for most sports has been gone for a decade, where, as soon as the season ends, then there's, with hockey, there's spring league and summer league and, tryouts for the next year as soon as the season ends, and it just rolls one thing right into the next. So, I think the impact that has had is that there's a really strong argument to be made for starting to implement some of the recovery strategies and even nutrition and supplementation strategies that we probably typically think of more as appropriate for professional athletes, for athletes that are at younger ages, because they're exposing their bodies now to the same or similar levels of stress as professional athletes. And even, obviously the speed at the professional level in all sports is higher than youth sports, but it's just the total volume of work and the consistency of the schedule where, you practice every day, you have games, you have these tournaments on weekends where you might be playing 2 games in a day, multiple days in a row. And that level of stress requires additional considerations to help athletes recover on a day-to-day basis. But then, even more longer term, just maintaining their health and their durability so that they're able to sustain that, because it's not, it's certainly not a level of stress that the human body is intended to go through. So, I think that there are, the impact of sleep and making sure that sleep is quality and you're maximizing your opportunity there is critical for kids at that age. I think obviously there's training implications there too, but, even making sure that from a dietary standpoint that they're really focused on a more performance-driven diet plan, and that they're conscious of what they're putting in their body to 100%. Make sure that they're fueled and that they're maximizing their recovery windows is really important, even at younger ages.
Yeah. I have, this, but I have 3 kids, a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and soon to be 15, and then an 11-year-old. And their schedules they need a personal assistant. Like it's and they need a father to be around to help with a pro schedule of coaching, but they're super busy and they're playing multiple sports. They're still in that window of playing multiple sports, which is great for their development and their fitness and sports experience. But they're not going to get by with the work level, like you said, with just 3 square meals. Like if anything, that's where now that foundation is set for athletes, young athletes like them, and then you can add more things in similar to a pro. Maybe it's more protein, maybe it's more specific nutrients and vitamins and micros and things like that. But they're going at a high level, and there's no shortage of extra camps, extra skill sessions for whatever sport there is. But they're training at a high level, and I don't think a Flintstones vitamin, for everybody who's listening to it still remembers what that is, is going to cover it for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember working with a high school athlete years ago that was a multi-sport athlete through high school, and he was playing at one point. He came into our facility to train, and he had said, like, Kev, my hip flexor's killing me. It's been bugging me for the last few days. And we talked more about what his schedule was at that time, And this is a kid that ended up playing Division I hockey. He was a really good athlete. So at that time, he was on his school baseball team, his school soccer team, a club soccer team, a club hockey team, and his school hockey team. So we had 5 schedules that he was navigating at once. And you realize that, one, the youth sports landscape has made it very challenging to continue to play multiple sports. And when you are a higher level athlete, or if you're one of the better players in one or multiple sports, all of your teams are gonna use you as much as possible, right? So it's not like, you're playing a lot of minutes on your club hockey team and then you're going to your high school team and you're dialing back a little bit. It's that team wants to win too. If you're a big piece of that puzzle, they're going to use you as much as you can. And, at some point, everybody's going to break down. There's only a certain amount of volume that athletes that people are intended to take on. But if from a fueling standpoint too, you think, everybody's kind of anchored to this idea of like the 2,000 calorie a day diet. And, when you have 3 practices or sporting events on a day after you go through school and everything else, obviously that's just not going to cut it.
Yeah. On that road to pro, so we've covered youth and a little bit of pro, and you have a lot of experience with this. And we both went through a time, maybe about a month ago, where the NHL draft happened. And what do you think of the big things that a first-year player is going to experience, coming in? Now they dominated their environment in their past, whatever league they were in, and whether it be college, whether it be junior or whatever, and now they're continuing to climb the mountain, and they're way further up than they ever had been, and the air is getting thinner, the game is getting faster, and now they're going against not a narrow age group, but now it's a big span of okay, I'm playing against athletes my age, but I'm also playing against sometimes 15, 20-year seasoned veterans in the NHL who know the game inside and out and probably can play it blindfolded, What do you see in those athletes, and they come in their stresses or what their expectations are on them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of the best players that are being considered, certainly at the NHL Combine and then through the drafting process in general, some of them may make a U18 team to represent their country. And, you go through that developmental stage, you might be, playing a U15 team, then U16, U17, U18. And then all of a sudden the next year, you have World Juniors in hockey too, but then the next year it's the U40 team that you have to, Zdeno Chara and Jumbo and some of these guys that have played really late into their careers. So, not only are you competing against people that have 10, 15, 20 years more experience playing in that league than you are, but you're also just competing against the best players in the world that have established their place on that hierarchy over the course of several decades. So, the competition pool opens up quite a bit where, now you need to be the best on a 20-year age range instead of for your birth year or whatever the case is. And, I think that stage, when we get kids, so right after there's the combine, then there's the draft, and then we see them shortly after for development camp, as you know, and that development camp period is really exciting for me. It's a fun opportunity to get to know some of the newer kids that are coming in, but it's also really interesting because everybody's experiences coming into that are so different. You get some kids that, maybe played for the U.S. national team development program where they have structured strength and conditioning, and there's, a little bit of education there, and some of the supporting habits of what being a professional requires. At a minimum, they're exposed to, and they're aware of some of the options and some of the things that they're going to need to start to take more seriously as they progress on through their careers. You have other players that, whether they're from different countries, whether they're just from a small town and, kind of came up without having some exposure to professional strength and conditioning coaches and nutritionists and mental skills and all of those different areas, that they come in and they're completely green. It's a blank canvas. They don't know what they don't know yet. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing because they've literally never been exposed to it. So, I think trying to, as a staff member of the organization, part of our job is to really get a better understanding of where is each player at and what resources do they need and what information do they need so that we can help them as an individual kind of bridge the gap on not just what they know, but then also what is their environment and what does their situation look like. If we get a kid that's going to a university and, we know the staff there and we have an understanding of what that staff does exceptionally well, what the resources are, then it gives us a really clear idea of where we may be able to help support that staff and support the player as they go through that stage. It's a little more challenging for some of the players that are, going back to Europe to play in whatever league that they're going back to. So, it's really a matter of trying to learn more about what the player needs and then trying to learn about what resources will be available to them. And then, we talked earlier on, there's all these different areas that can impact performance. So, which ones are the biggest need for this player and what are the resources that speak to that need? And then how can we support those things? So, we've, the last couple of years at our development camps, we've had daily, really short presentations to the group where we just review really simple things like the importance of sleep and how to strategies that players can use or tools that players can use to improve their sleep quality. We talk about the value of in-season training, and a lot of players, as may make it to that level without really putting any emphasis on training during the season. And I certainly saw working in the private sector that we'd have these players that would come in and they'd work their ass off all summer long. They'd make some positive progress, and then they'd come back at the end of the season and it was like starting over again. So, we talk about like the yo-yo program. It's like you work really hard, you get better, and then you spend all season letting everything slide back down. And then the next off season and year over year, you end up essentially staying at a fairly stable level entering the season.
Right.
Which doesn't allow you to make long-term progress. And, also try to highlight that if you're detraining during the season, it means that you're hitting the most critical part of the season with your lowest physical capacity. You're not as fast as you should be. You're not as strong as you should be. Yeah. We've seen pretty substantial decreases in mobility in certain joints over the course of a season if players aren't diligent with that type of work throughout the year too. So, and then obviously the nutrition side of things too. And, I've presented to junior teams in the past too. And like, we literally talk about how to turn a stove on because they've never done it. So it's, it's life skills 101. It's, how do you navigate a grocery store? What foods are you buying? How can you combine these things into recipes that check some boxes from a nutrition standpoint, but then also are palatable for kids in that age group. And, so, I think when you get kids from a development standpoint that are coming in for the first time, if they have not been exposed to a lot of those things before, and a lot of them haven't, it can be a little bit of like a wide eye drinking from a fire hose experience where not only now are they being exposed to all these things that can support and help their performance and their development, but there's also an expectation that they take advantage of them. It's not, here's a long list of things that could benefit you, pick what you like and move on from there. It's like, this is the standard that is required to be successful at the professional level. And if you're serious about taking the steps to compete at that level, then you need to start doing these things now. And, obviously the limiting factors for players are different on a case-by-case basis, but there are certainly some foundational habits, the sleep, the nutrition, the consistency with your preparation off the ice and your training that are common across all players that everybody needs.
Yeah. As a strategy too, that foundation becomes critical because the tasks on them that are challenging, at least what I've found, like a rookie comes in, practices are going to be super intense, super technical, new system. So their brain is going to be, firing on all cylinders, maybe even more, eventually with the addition of BSCG to our product line, which is exciting, and having Synapsin available, that higher end focus and be able to go into that environment on the day-to-day basis, especially when maybe you landed at 2-3 in the morning and maybe you got a 12 o'clock practice in Winnipeg and, you got to get up for that, and that's an important practice because it's at the beginning of the year. Those supportive nutrients can help that type of player. But there's other nuance too, like that I've learned. Like practice is hard because really focused veterans want to have a good practice. They don't want to be sloppy. They understand the concept above. I'm going to fight like I train and train like I fight. So there's no difference in my practice as opposed to what I'm going to do in the game. I'm going to prepare myself to such a high level that I'm not going to see anything too foreign to me from an intensity standpoint, at least in a game, right? Rookies need to understand that, and that just adds to their workload. That just adds to the intensity demand on them, which then trickles down into energy expenditure and higher nutrient needs, right? Higher fueling needs and things like that. So you're absolutely right with the foundational piece. I can't agree more. Like if they have that and those strategies, especially recovery and sleep patterns, and the choice to dedicate themselves to that, it's going to set them up much, much better. And you won't see that as many yo-yo dips from performance, or at least you shouldn't have. I thought we did a great job together when we did establish what we were tracking in season and the metrics that we wanted to follow from a strength standpoint, from a neurological standpoint with jumps and what we had at the time. As you said, rubbing two sticks together to get fire, it felt like a little bit. But, now if you look at it, I'm sure you're in a position, and I certainly am structuring it this way now. Coming back to the NHL is like, how are we looking at on ice speed and what the cost of a game is, and how does practice relate to that, and how do we plan our workloads, and how do we get in-game on ice speed measures to compare to on ice practice in-game speed measures? Are we maintaining that course or that stimulus? Are we keeping it present throughout the year?
Yeah, there's no question. And the reality is that the demands on all players aren't equal.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have players that in practice more is asked of them than other players. You're going to have other players that in a game there might be more asked of certain players. And even that fluctuates on a night-by-night basis depending on how certain players are playing and who's in the lineup, mm-hmm. who you're competing against, and what the strengths of the opponent are at times too. So, I think having a pulse on that constant kind of push-pull between we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to be prepared, but also not so much that there's going to be it's going to open up a longer-term recovery window that could negatively impact the next game. So, I think the important thing in, whether it's a testing process or, what kind of gets lumped under this term of monitoring is that you're attaining information that can create a feedback loop for you that leads to some sort of intervention. And whether that intervention is training related, whether it's recommendations to the coaching staff about the nature of practices or the duration of practice or specific extra work that players may benefit from, or if it's just an understanding of like, hey, this guy's, maybe has a family at home, everybody's sick, is up all night with a newborn baby, is feeling worn down, but we have a game anyway. So, what strategies can we tap into? You mentioned synapsin and the impact that can have on focus. Like that's a great example of, once game day rolls around, everything that happened that led you to there takes a backseat to what do we need to do to make sure that this player is in a position to perform as well as possible. Right. And, I think having some strategies where it's like, okay, we have 24 hours. What can we do to put a player back together to make sure they're in a good spot for tomorrow? And there's a checklist for that. And then there's also you showed up to the rink to play the game at night and doesn't feel, whatever, he's mentally fatigued or doesn't feel like he has his legs or whatever the feedback is, that there's another list of strategies that, has a more acute timeline that they can tap into to try to feel as good as possible that night.
I've said this many times, and I'm going to continue to say it, that it's embarking on a project like Metabolic Elite is exciting. It's exciting professionally. It's exciting to develop something that's going to have an impact on the industry. But to do it with, colleagues, more importantly, friends, is amazing. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you being part of it and sharing your high-level knowledge and experience with this group. And I know we're all going to do some amazing things.
No, I'm excited for all the same reasons, Mike. I think, this is an opportunity. Obviously, both of us, I would describe as lifelong learners, and we're constantly trying to find ways to provide better for the athletes that we have an opportunity to work with. And Metabolic Elite certainly is going to be a great option for athletes moving forward. But I also think the opportunity to start to pull the collective knowledge of everybody that's on the board and start to create educational material on all of the different strategies that are available to athletes to help improve their performance is really exciting too. So I'm pumped to be a part of it.